Princess Silara of the Gyrex Empire was known across the galaxy not only for her beauty, but for her unmatched intelligence and fierce independence. Born into the powerful royal family, she had everything most beings in the galaxy could ever dream of: luxury, status, and the finest suitors from every species imaginable. Yet, none of them impressed her. She had met countless alien princes, warriors, and diplomats over the years, each one eager to win her favor with their wealth or power. But Silara couldn't help but feel disappointed by them all. The suitors seemed more interested in impressing her with their titles than connecting with her as a person. To her, they all felt predictable, each one playing the same political games, saying the right words but never showing true depth or originality. For Silara, her life felt more like a series of formalities than anything meaningful. Despite her status as the future ruler of the empire, she secretly longed for something more. A connection with someone who could challenge her, someone who wasn't intimidated by her power. On the surface, Silara seemed like the perfect princess, poised and graceful in every situation. She could speak dozens of languages, navigate complex political schemes, and entertain guests with ease. Yet inside, she often felt isolated, trapped by the expectations placed upon her by her family and society. Her father, Emperor Gyrex, always reminded her that her duty to the empire came before anything else. This included her eventual marriage, which had been arranged long ago, but Silara had never shared her father's eagerness. She had heard the whispers from the council chambers, the whispers about which noble house her marriage would benefit the most. But none of these arrangements could make her feel like her heart was in the right place. Every time she looked at her potential suitors, she saw only a chance for power, a political tool to maintain the empire's dominance. It was on one such evening, during a grand banquet held in her honor, that Silara found herself sitting among a crowd of foreign dignitaries. The hall was filled with alien royalty, rich merchants, and military leaders, all vying for her attention. Most of the room's occupants were wrapped in elegant, shimmering attire, each outfit carefully crafted to highlight their culture and status. Yet, despite the sea of wealth and grandeur, Silara felt herself growing increasingly bored. She watched them all, laughing, talking, playing the game, wondering if anyone in the room could offer her something more than shallow pleasantries. But just as she was about to retreat from the festivities and take refuge in her private quarters, the door opened, and someone stepped into the room who instantly caught her attention. It wasn't the grand entrance of a well-known prince or military commander, nor was it someone famous or important. It was a human, Adrian Carter, a representative from Earth. The whispers around the room grew louder as people turned to glance at him. Humans, of course, were seen as nothing more than an afterthought in the galactic political landscape, mere players in the grand scheme of intergalactic power struggles. But Adrian wasn't just anyone. He stood tall with a rugged confidence that seemed out of place in a room full of polished elites. His clothing wasn't nearly as extravagant as the others, yet there was something about him that made Silara pause. He carried himself differently, as though he was unaffected by the formalities of the occasion. As the murmurs died down, Adrian walked confidently toward the center of the room, where Silara was sitting. To everyone's surprise, he didn't bow or greet her with the customary pleasantries. Instead, he gave her a simple nod of acknowledgement, his eyes meeting hers directly with no sign of hesitation. It was clear that Adrian wasn't like the other suitors. He didn't see her as a prize to be won, but rather as an equal. Silara couldn't help but be intrigued by him. There was something about his unpolished, straightforward nature that seemed to challenge her view of the galaxy. In a world full of pretentious beings, Adrian was a breath of fresh air. For the first time in years, Silara felt a flicker of curiosity. Maybe, just maybe, this human would be different. Adrian Carter had always been a man of action, not words. He had been raised on Earth, a planet often overlooked by the galaxy's elite, yet he had a deep understanding of what mattered most: survival, honor, and integrity. When he had been selected as Earth's envoy to the Galactic Council, he knew it would be a challenge. Humanity was young in the galactic scene, and many of the older, more established species treated humans as insignificant. But Adrian was determined to change that perception. He wasn't intimidated by alien customs or their high expectations. He had a job to do, and he was going to do it his way. Adrian's first meeting with Solara was nothing like he had expected. He had heard stories about the princess, how beautiful and intelligent she was, how she had no interest in the countless suitors who had tried to win her favor. Most of the time, the elite of the galaxy fell over themselves trying to get close to the princess, hoping for a chance to marry into the powerful Gyrex Empire. But Adrian wasn't interested in impressing her with shiny words or flattery. He had no intention of playing the game everyone else was so good at. He wasn't there to play politics. He was there to make a statement. Humanity deserved a place at the table, and he was going to make sure the galaxy knew it. When he stepped into the grand hall, he immediately felt the eyes of every alien in the room on him. His simple, non-formal attire stood in stark contrast to the opulent gowns and extravagant military uniforms surrounding him. Yet, as he walked confidently across the room, he could sense something shift. The usual noise of the banquet seemed to quiet down for a moment, and all attention turned to him. Solara, seated at the far end of the room, watched him with quiet curiosity, her sharp eyes studying every move he made. She had never seen a human in such a setting. So bold, so unafraid, and so different. When Adrian reached the center of the room, where Solara was sitting, he didn't bow or offer the usual flowery words of greeting. Instead, he stood before her with a simple, steady gaze. "Princess Solara, I assume you're tired of hearing the same old speeches," he said, his voice calm and direct, drawing a few chuckles from the crowd. The silence was thick. Most of the guests expected Solara to be insulted. After all, who dared to address her like this? But to her surprise, she felt a flicker of amusement in her chest. Adrian wasn't trying to charm her or seek her approval. He was simply being himself. The atmosphere shifted, and soon it wasn't just Solara who was intrigued. It was everyone in the room. Alien leaders, once skeptical of humanity's place in the galaxy, watched the human with increasing interest. Adrian didn't try to impress anyone with his knowledge of galactic politics or ancient alien history. Instead, he spoke honestly about Earth's place in the universe and what humanity could bring to the table. He spoke of cooperation, of mutual respect, and of the unique perspective that humans could offer in the ever-changing galaxy. But it wasn't just his words that captured Solara's attention. It was the way he carried himself. Unlike the other suitors, who bowed and complimented her to earn her favor, Adrian didn't seem to care about winning her over. He didn't play by their rules. And for Solara, that was a breath of fresh air. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, not even her own people. No one had ever challenged her views or made her feel like she was more than just a princess bound by duty. Adrian's challenge wasn't one of violence or grand gestures. It was one of ideas. A challenge to the status quo, a challenge to how things had always been done. For the first time, Solara felt as though she was truly being seen, not as a princess to be courted, but as a person who could hold her own in the galaxy. "Perhaps you're right, Adrian Carter," she said, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of interest. "Maybe it's time to hear something different." And just like that, the spark was lit. Solara's curiosity had been piqued. She couldn't help but wonder, who was this human, and what could he teach her about herself and the galaxy that she had yet to learn? The next day, the atmosphere in the palace was tense, and the grand banquet hall was still buzzing with the aftermath of Adrian's bold entrance. Everyone in the room, from the highest-ranking alien officials to the court jesters, had witnessed the human's unexpected confidence. Whispers of his daring words had spread like wildfire across the empire, with many wondering if he had overstated humanity's importance in the galactic scene. But one thing was clear: Adrian had made an impression, and no one could ignore the fact that he had boldly stood in front of Princess Solara without hesitation or fear. For Solara, that encounter had stayed with her. It was strange to feel this kind of stir, a mix of intrigue and confusion. Adrian had not only been different in appearance and attitude, but he had also challenged her very perspective on how things worked in the galaxy. Most beings, especially those in positions of power, would have tried to flatter her to win her favor, but Adrian had done the opposite. He had dismissed the political games and spoke to her as an equal, a rare occurrence in her royal life. It was both refreshing and frustrating. Solara was used to being admired, even revered, by those who sought her attention. But Adrian had done nothing to win her approval. His words were bold and different, and for the first time, Solara was unsure of how to respond. The real challenge came when, a few days later, the diplomatic event was held to discuss an alliance between the Gyrex Empire and several other powerful alien factions. It was supposed to be a quiet affair, an opportunity for formal negotiations and strategic discussions. Yet, everything changed when Adrian was invited to attend as Earth's representative. The council chamber, which was typically reserved for the most esteemed members of galactic society, became charged with a strange energy as Adrian entered the room. Solara stood at the head of the table, as was customary for the princess, her regal presence dominating the room. As the discussions began, it quickly became clear that things were not going as expected. One of the highest-ranking Gyrex military officers, General Tyrex, began to openly challenge Adrian, mocking his straightforward approach. "Do you truly believe that humans can understand the complexities of galactic politics?" General Tyrex sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Your species barely made it past the Stone Age, and now you expect us to take you seriously." The other alien representatives laughed nervously, not wanting to offend the powerful Gyrex general. Solara, however, watched with a growing sense of anticipation. She had seen many diplomatic debates in her time, but she had never seen a human face such open ridicule without shrinking away. Adrian, who had been silent for most of the discussion, finally stood up, his expression calm but firm. "General Tyrex," he said, his voice carrying across the room, "I don't need your approval. I'm not here to impress you or anyone else. I'm here to do what no one else has dared to do. Tell the truth." For a moment, there was complete silence in the chamber. No one had ever dared to speak so boldly in the presence of a high-ranking officer, let alone the princess herself. But instead of retreating, Adrian stood his ground. "Humans may not have the centuries of history that your species does, but we've learned to survive by thinking outside the box, by questioning what's been accepted as the right way. We don't have the luxury of tradition and protocol that many of your species cling to. That's why we're here. We want to help, and we have ideas that could benefit all of us." His words were sharp and precise, and despite the initial ridicule, they resonated with more than just Solara. The other council members, while still skeptical, couldn't help but listen to the human's directness and his challenge to their way of thinking. They had expected him to back down, to apologize for his species' relative youth in the galaxy, but instead, he was calling them out for their arrogance. Solara felt her heart race. This wasn't just a diplomatic argument. It was a challenge in every sense of the word. Adrian wasn't just advocating for Earth. He was forcing everyone in the room to reassess their assumptions about the universe, about power, and about what truly mattered. For the first time in years, Solara found herself questioning the way things had always been. After Adrian's bold statement, the room was still. It was as if the walls had shifted, and the very air felt different. General Tyrex, who had been prepared to dismiss Adrian entirely, now found himself on the defensive. Galaxy was full of powerful beings and ancient empires, but here was a human who didn't care for the rules. He was something different, and for the first time in her life, Solara wondered if maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what she needed. The following days were filled with tension as the debate over the future of humanity's role in the galaxy continued to unfold. Princess Solara had seen a side of Adrian Carter that no one had expected: his resilience, his unwavering confidence, and his ability to challenge the established order with nothing but his words. But what struck her the most was how his presence lingered in her mind long after their conversations. The more she observed him, the more she realized how different he was from the other ambassadors and diplomats she had known. Adrian didn't play the game of politics. Instead, he spoke from his heart, unfiltered and unafraid of the consequences. Solara had always been the one in control. As the future leader of the Gyrex Empire, she was expected to command respect and follow the traditions that had been passed down through generations. But Adrian's refusal to bow to those same traditions made her wonder, why should she have to conform to a set of rules that didn't always make sense? Why should she be bound by her title, her responsibilities, and the endless expectations of her family? The more she thought about it, the more she began to question everything she had ever known. One evening, as the sun set over the grand palace, Solara found herself walking alone in the palace gardens, lost in thought. The royal gardens were her sanctuary, a place where she could escape the suffocating weight of her royal duties. The scent of blooming flowers and the soft hum of alien wildlife surrounded her as she wandered among the pathways. It was here, in the quiet solitude of the gardens, that she first realized how much her life had been shaped by others, by her father, by her advisors, by the expectations of the empire. She had spent so much time trying to meet their demands that she had lost sight of what she truly wanted. Suddenly, a voice broke through her thoughts. "I didn't expect to find you here." Solara turned and found Adrian standing at the entrance to the garden. He wasn't in the usual formal attire that everyone else wore at the palace. Instead, he was dressed in simple clothing, a stark contrast to the extravagant robes of the Gyrex court. His casual appearance made him stand out even more, but it was his calm demeanor that caught Solara's attention. "What are you doing here, human?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with a hint of curiosity. She didn't expect him to respond so casually to her presence, yet here he was, standing at the threshold of her sanctuary. "I thought you might like some company," Adrian replied, his tone light but sincere. "You've been quiet lately. I figured you might need someone to talk to." Solara studied him for a moment, her brow furrowing slightly. "I don't have time for idle chatter. There are important matters that need my attention." "I'm sure there are," Adrian said with a shrug. "But sometimes you need to take a step back. We all do." He paused for a moment, allowing the words to hang in the air. "Especially someone like you." Solara was taken aback by his words. "Someone like me," she repeated, her voice filled with a mix of confusion and surprise. "Yeah, you're not just a princess or a future empress. You're a person too. You deserve more than just being a puppet for the empire. You deserve to make your own choices, even if it means stepping outside the lines." His words hit her harder than she expected. For the first time in her life, someone was telling her that she didn't have to follow the rigid path that had been laid out for her, that she didn't have to sacrifice herself for the empire's glory. It was an idea so foreign to her that it left her speechless. Adrian stepped closer, his presence surprisingly comforting despite the walls Solara had built around herself. "You don't have to keep carrying the weight of the empire's expectations. You can choose your own destiny, just like I'm choosing mine." Solara swallowed hard, her mind racing. Adrian wasn't just talking about political alliances or the fate of entire civilizations. He was speaking to her heart. The walls she had built around herself, walls of duty and responsibility, had suddenly started to crumble. She had always known that she was more than just a political figure, but hearing it from someone else made her realize how much she had ignored her own desires and needs. "But what about the empire?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "What about my people, my family? I can't just walk away from it all." Adrian smiled gently, the warmth in his eyes undeniable. "You don't have to walk away from them. But maybe it's time to stop letting others decide who you are and what you should do. Maybe it's time to figure that out for yourself." The days that followed were unlike any that Solara had experienced before. There was a sense of change in the air, a quiet stirring that she couldn't ignore. The Gyrex Empire, for all its power and grandeur, felt distant and cold now, like something she had once been a part of but no longer fit into. She had spent years trying to meet everyone's expectations, to be the perfect princess, the perfect heir to the throne. But now, for the first time, she was beginning to wonder if she could ever be anything more than that. Adrian had planted a seed in her mind, one that was slowly growing into something much bigger. He had shown her that she didn't have to follow the path that had been laid out for her. She didn't have to choose the Empire's glory over her own happiness. The thought of being free, of making her own choices, filled her with a sense of excitement she hadn't felt in years. But the fear was there too, the fear of what it would mean to step away from everything she had known. It wasn't just the Empire that held her back. There was her family, her father, and the council. She had always been groomed to follow in her father's footsteps, to lead the Empire with strength and wisdom. But what if her true strength didn't lie in the expectations placed on her? What if it lay in the freedom to choose her own path, regardless of what others thought? Solara spent more and more time alone, wandering the palace grounds and reflecting on her life. Every corner of the palace seemed to whisper the same things, the same duties, the same responsibilities. But there was something different in her heart now. She could no longer ignore the growing realization that she had been living someone else's dream, not her own. One evening, as the stars began to shine brightly in the sky, Solara found herself standing at the edge of the palace balcony. The vastness of space stretched out before her, a never-ending expanse of stars and planets, each one holding its own secrets and possibilities. She had always seen herself as a part of that universe, but now, for the first time, she felt like she could be something more than just a pawn in a galactic game. "Are you thinking about leaving, Solara?" The voice broke through her thoughts, and she turned to see Adrian standing a few feet away, his gaze steady as he watched her. She had never told him about her internal struggle, but somehow he seemed to understand. He had a way of reading her that no one else had. "I don't know," Solara replied, her voice soft. "I've always been so focused on what was expected of me, but now I wonder if there's more to life than just duty and power." Adrian stepped closer, his expression kind but resolute. "You've spent your whole life living up to other people's expectations, Solara. It's time you live for yourself." Solara looked out at the stars again, her heart racing with uncertainty. "What if I fail? What if my people need me?" "They will still need you, no matter what you choose, but they'll need you to be true to yourself, not just a puppet for their demands. You can't lead them if you're not willing to lead yourself first." His words echoed in her mind, and for the first time in a long time, Solara felt a sense of clarity. Adrian wasn't asking her to abandon her people. He was asking her to embrace who she truly was. She could still be the leader she was meant to be, but only if she found the courage to live for herself first. "I've spent so many years worrying about what everyone else thinks," Solara said, her voice trembling with emotion. "But maybe it's time I started thinking about what I want. I don't want to just be a princess. I want to be more than that." Adrian smiled gently, his eyes filled with understanding. "You are more than that, Solara. You've always been more than that. It's time to show the galaxy who you really are." For the first time in years, Solara felt a spark of hope ignite inside her. She didn't have all the answers, and she knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But for the first time, she was willing to take the risk. She was willing to step away from the safety of what was expected and embrace the unknown. "I think you're right," she said, her voice gaining strength. "It's time for a new beginning." And with those words, Solara knew that her journey was just beginning. The galaxy was vast, full of dangers and opportunities, but she was no longer afraid. She was ready to face whatever came next, not as a princess bound by duty, but as a woman ready to carve her own path and create a future on her own terms. The power was hers to claim, and with Adrian by her side, she knew she could conquer whatever challenges lay ahead. With the decision made, Solara felt a sense of freedom she had never experienced before. No longer shackled by the expectations of her empire, She was free to choose her own path. But freedom didn't come without challenges. There were still many in the Gyrex Empire who would oppose her choices, who would see her decision to step away from tradition as a weakness. Solara knew that, and she was ready to face whatever came her way. What she hadn't expected, however, was that the first test of her resolve would come so quickly. It began with a visit from General Tyrex, the powerful military leader who had so openly mocked humanity during the council meeting. He was known for his strength and his unwavering loyalty to the Empire, and he had never been one to tolerate weakness in any form. As the doors to the palace throne room opened, Solara stood tall, her heart pounding in her chest. She had prepared herself for this moment, but she still felt a surge of tension when she saw the general approach. Princess Solara. General Tyrex greeted her with a cold, formal bow. His tone was respectful, but there was a sharpness to his words, as if he already knew she was about to make waves in the Empire. "I've come to discuss the matter of your recent decisions." Solara met his gaze without hesitation, her eyes unwavering. "I'm listening," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. She had no intention of backing down now, not after everything she had learned. The general's lips curled into a tight smile. "You've decided to ignore the wisdom of your ancestors and the traditions that have kept the Gyrex Empire strong for centuries. You've chosen to stand by the human, Adrian Carter, and openly challenge our way of life. You are playing a dangerous game, Your Highness." Solara's mind raced, but she refused to let the general see her uncertainty. She had made her choice, and she wouldn't let anyone intimidate her into changing her mind. "I'm not playing a game, General," she replied calmly. "I'm choosing a future where I make the decisions, not just follow what has been handed to me." The general's eyes narrowed, and his tone grew even colder. "You may have the power to make decisions, Princess, but you do not have the strength to lead. Your actions have already caused a rift in the Empire. There are those who are questioning your authority, who doubt your ability to command. If you continue down this path, you risk losing everything." Solara felt a flicker of doubt, but she quickly pushed it aside. She had come too far to let the threats of one man undo her resolve. "I am not afraid of losing power, General. I am more concerned with losing myself." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "The Empire needs a leader who is willing to think differently, who can challenge the status quo and lead us to a new future. I am that leader." General Cyrex's eyes darkened, and for a moment, Solara thought he might lunge at her, his anger boiling over. But instead, he stood perfectly still, his fists clenched at his sides. "You're a fool, Princess," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you can change the galaxy with words and ideals. You'll see how quickly the Empire turns on you. You'll regret this decision." Solara didn't flinch. "Maybe. But I'd rather regret standing up for what I believe in than live my entire life as a puppet." For a long moment, the two stood locked in a silent battle of wills, neither of them willing to back down. Finally, General Tyrex let out a sigh, his expression hardening once more. "Very well, Princess. But know this. If you continue down this path, there will be consequences. You may have the title, but you will not have the Empire's loyalty." As the general turned to leave, Solara's heart pounded in her chest. She knew he wasn't bluffing. There were many in the Empire who shared his views, who would see her decision as a threat to their way of life. But in that moment, something inside her clicked. She had never been the perfect princess, the dutiful heir to the throne. But she was something more now, something stronger, something capable of standing up to the very people who had once controlled her life. Adrian's words echoed in her mind. "You don't have to follow the rules. You can lead by your own terms." Solara watched the general's retreating figure, feeling the surge of determination. She had made her choice, and she would not back down. She would face whatever came next with courage, not fear. The Gyrex Empire might not be ready for her revolution, but she was ready to lead it, no matter the cost. The first test had come, and Solara had passed. but there were many more to come, and she was ready to face them all. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in the palace only grew stronger. Silara could feel it in the air, thick and heavy like a storm waiting to break. General Cyrex's words still echoed in her mind, warning her of the consequences of defying tradition. The weight of the Empire's expectations pressed down on her, but it was the look in her father's eyes that truly unsettled her. The once proud and loving man who had raised her was now distant, his disappointment in her choices unmistakable. It was clear that the Empire's ruling class was not ready to accept her decision to chart a new course. Despite the pressure, Silara was resolute. She had already chosen her path, and she couldn't let anyone, not even her father, make her second-guess herself. Adrian stood by her side, offering quiet support, but Silara knew that this battle was one she would have to fight alone. The road ahead was uncertain, and there was no turning back now. One evening, as she sat alone in her chambers, a knock echoed through the room. The door creaked open, and Silara looked up to see Adrian standing in the doorway, his face unreadable. She had come to rely on his presence, finding solace in his unwavering belief that she could be more than just the ruler the Empire expected her to be. He had a way of grounding her, of reminding her that her choices were hers alone. "What is it?" Silara asked, her voice soft but tinged with curiosity. Adrian hesitated for a moment, then stepped into the room. "There's something you need to see," he said quietly, his tone serious. Silara followed him down the narrow corridors of the palace, her heart beginning to race. She could tell something was wrong. The palace had been eerily quiet since her decision to defy the Empire's expectations, and it was clear that tensions were rising among the highest ranks. As they approached the throne room, the doors swung open, revealing a gathering of high-ranking officials, including her father. The room fell silent as Silara entered, all eyes turning toward her. Her father, King Orin, stood at the center of the room, his expression stern. Beside him stood General Cyrex, his arms crossed and his gaze cold. The room was thick with an unspoken tension, and Silara's stomach churned as she realized that this was the moment she had been dreading. "Silara," her father's voice rang out, filled with authority. "We need to discuss the future of the Empire." "I've made my decision, father," Silara replied, her voice steady, "and I stand by it. The Empire cannot remain stagnant. We need to evolve." "Evolve," King Orin repeated, his voice rising with anger. "You are talking about abandoning everything the Gyrex Empire stands for. You would throw away centuries of tradition and leadership for some fleeting ideal." "I'm not abandoning anything," Silara countered, her heart racing as she faced her father's furious gaze. "I'm leading us into the future. Our people deserve a ruler who is not afraid to make bold choices." Her father's eyes narrowed, and he took a step closer. "Bold choices? You're playing with fire, Silara. You are stirring a rebellion in the heart of the Empire. You think the people will follow you. You're wrong." Silara felt the weight of his words like a blow to her chest. The pain of her father's rejection cut deeper than she had anticipated. She had hoped for understanding, but all she saw in his eyes now was anger and disappointment. She had failed to meet the expectations he had set for her, but in that moment, a quiet voice in the back of her mind reminded her of why she had made this choice in the first place. She had to be true to herself. Before she could respond, General Cyrex stepped forward, his voice cold and commanding. "The Empire does not have room for weakness, Princess. If you refuse to lead as we have always led, then perhaps it is time for someone else to take your place." Silara felt her pulse quicken. This was the ultimatum she had feared, the moment where her fate would be decided. The Empire had always been built on tradition and power, and now her refusal to follow those rules had placed her in direct opposition to the very foundation of her world. But in the depths of her heart, Silara knew she couldn't back down. She had spent too long living in the shadows of others' expectations. If she gave in now, if she allowed the Empire to dictate her future, then she would lose herself completely. Her choice had already been made, and there was no going back. "I won't back down," Solara said, her voice unwavering. "I will not be swayed by threats or tradition. The galaxy is changing, and I intend to lead the Gyrex Empire into that future." The tension that had been building for weeks finally broke. Solara stood in the center of the throne room, her heart pounding in her chest as the weight of her father's disappointment bore down on her. King Orin's eyes were filled with anger and betrayal, and General Gyrex stood at his side, a dark shadow ready to pounce. Adrian's presence beside her offered a small comfort, but she knew that what had just happened could never be undone. There would be no going back to the way things had been. The lines had been drawn. The war for the future of the Gyrex Empire had begun. "What are you going to do, Father?" Solara asked, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "Are you going to force me to choose between my beliefs and my family?" King Orin's gaze hardened. "You have chosen this path, Solara. Now you must live with the consequences. The Empire will not bow to a princess who defies its traditions. You think you can lead us into a new future, but all you are doing is bringing chaos." Solara's pulse quickened, but she didn't flinch. She had known this was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud still cut deep. She had always looked up to her father, admired his wisdom and strength. But now she saw a man who was afraid of change, a man willing to sacrifice progress for the sake of preserving a past that no longer served the Empire. "I don't want chaos," Solara said firmly, her voice carrying more conviction than she'd ever felt before. "But I refuse to lead an empire that refuses to grow. The galaxy is changing, Father. We can either move forward with it or be left behind." Adrian's words echoed in her mind. The future belongs to those brave enough to shape it. And now, more than ever, she realized that she had to be that brave one. She had already chosen this path, and she couldn't turn back. If her father and the Empire couldn't understand that, then she would have to forge ahead without them. General Gyrex scoffed. "You are a naive girl, Solara. Do you really think the Empire will fall in line with your ideals? They will rise up against you. They will tear you down." "I'm not afraid," Solara replied, her voice sharp. "You're the one who's afraid. Afraid of change, afraid of what's next. You're clinging to the old ways like they're the only thing that matters. But I've seen the future. I've seen what we can be." A flicker of hesitation crossed General Gyrex's face, but it quickly vanished. He wasn't ready to accept that. He wasn't ready to let go of the Empire's grip on power. But that didn't matter to Solara. Her father's resistance didn't matter either. What mattered now was that she had found her voice. She had found the strength to stand up for what she believed in, even if it meant standing alone. As the silence in the room stretched on, Solara turned to Adrian. "I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for the future. I'm doing this for the people who believe in us." Adrian nodded, his eyes filled with admiration. "And I believe in you, Solara. You don't have to do this alone." Solara's heart swelled with gratitude. Adrian's support meant more to her than she could ever say. He was right. She didn't have to fight this battle alone. But she also knew that the fight ahead would not be easy. She would face resistance from every corner of the Empire, from the people who didn't understand, from the ones who feared change. But in that moment, she realized something important. She wasn't just fighting for the Empire. She was fighting for herself, for her own freedom, for her own right to choose her destiny. "Let them come," Solara said, her voice strong and defiant. "I won't back down. If I have to face an entire empire to make this change, then that's what I'll do." General Gyrex's eyes blazed with fury, but Solara didn't waver. She had already made up her mind. She would face whatever came next with courage, with conviction, and with the unshakable belief that this was the right path. The road ahead would be difficult, but it was one she had chosen, and nothing would stop her now. As Solara turned to leave the throne room, she felt the weight of the Empire's gaze on her back. The battle had only just begun, and there was no telling how it would end. But Solara was ready. She was ready to lead the empire into the future, no matter the cost. The rebel's heart inside her burned brighter than ever, and with Adrian by her side, she knew that she could face whatever challenges awaited. The future was hers to shape, and she would stop at nothing to see it through. The days that followed were a whirlwind of political maneuvering, tense negotiations, and quiet moments of reflection. Silara had made her choice, and there was no turning back. The empire was split in two, with some supporting her vision of progress, and others firmly standing by the old ways. It was a battle not just of ideologies, but of wills. Every decision she made, every word she spoke, seemed to add fuel to the fire of rebellion growing within the empire's walls. Silara knew the road ahead would not be easy, but in the midst of it all, one thing was clear: she was not alone. Adrian remained by her side, his unwavering belief in her giving her the strength to face each new challenge. The days of hiding behind tradition were over, and now it was time to take action. The people who had once placed their trust in the empire's rigid structure began to question whether the system had truly served them, or whether it had been a trap all along. Silara could feel the tide turning, slowly but surely. One evening, as she stood before a council of advisors, the weight of the decision that lay ahead pressed heavily on her shoulders. Her father's final words still rang in her ears. "You'll destroy everything we've built." Those words, once so sharp and accusing, now seemed hollow. He had not understood the vision she was trying to create. But that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the empire's future, and whether it could evolve into something greater than its past. "We must act quickly," Silara said, her voice steady as she addressed the council. "We can't wait for the old ways to crumble. We must build the future we deserve, a future where everyone, no matter their rank or race, has a voice." The room was filled with murmurs of agreement from those who had pledged their support, but there were still those who remained silent, uncertain of what Silara's vision would truly mean for them. Her father's loyalists, once the pillars of the empire, were now the ones standing in opposition to her. Silara could see the uncertainty in their eyes, the fear that had begun to spread like wildfire through the corridors of power. But Silara was not afraid. She had already made up her mind. She had seen the cracks in the empire's foundation, and she had chosen to act on them. It was no longer just about power. It was about a chance for something better. "I don't expect everyone to agree with me," she continued, her eyes scanning the room, locking with each person's gaze. "But I do expect you to listen. We can no longer ignore the changes that are sweeping across the galaxy. We must choose to adapt, or we risk being left behind." It was then that Adrian stepped forward, his voice low but filled with conviction. "The empire will never change if we only listen to those who fear change. We've waited too long, and now it's time for the brave to lead. Silara is the future. If you want to be part of it, now is the time to choose." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything they had fought for. Silara felt her heart swell with pride. She wasn't alone in this battle. Adrian's support, the support of those who believed in her, made all the difference. Together, they had come this far. And together, they would see it through to the end. As the council members began to nod in agreement, Silara felt a shift in the air. The empire, once so unyielding, was starting to bend. It would not be easy, and it would not be quick, but the seeds of change had been planted, and they were beginning to grow. There would be battles ahead, but Silara knew that the tide was turning in her favor. Later that night, as she stood on the balcony of the palace, looking out over the city that would soon be hers to lead, Silara felt a surge of hope. The stars above her were a reminder of everything that was at stake: the future of her people, the future of the galaxy, and the future of the Gyrex Empire. She had come so far, and yet she knew this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with obstacles, and there would be moments when she would doubt herself. But Silara also knew that no matter what came next, she would continue to fight for what she believed in. She would fight for a future where the empire could grow and evolve, a future where all its people could stand together, not bound by tradition, but united by their shared vision. And as she turned to walk back into the palace, Adrian by her side, Celera knew that no matter what, the future was hers to shape. The Empire was changing, and with it, the galaxy would never be the same again.